It's interesting that Plato in ancient Greek society was a specific type of philosopher who wanted to create a new type of program in relation with politics. This is interesting because Plato, on the one hand, wanted to create a new type of program in relation, for example, with metaphysics. In fact, Plato, criticizing Homer, explained that on the one hand, we have a specific type of soul that is divided in three parts, but these three parts of a soul are in relation with the soul. In other words, each of us, everyone has these three types of specific type of soul that Plato, according to Plato, are the golden part, the silver part, and the iron part, and with a specific type of attitudes in relation with specifically these types of parts. Therefore, each individual has his specific type of inclination in relation with this specific type of soul. This is really interesting because, according to Plato, on the other hand, we have to consider that, in this sense, each individual could be important for his city state. And this is another point of view that could be interesting if we have to understand why Plato explains his type of philosophy. In fact, according to Plato, there is a sort of critics that Plato um, developed against his society, in particular because ancient Greek society was divided between classes. In this sense, that people who had the political power, who control the political power, were often the aristocrats. The aristocracy. In this sense, it's interesting that Athens, for example, explained, or better, developed a specific type of democracy. It was one of these city-states, probably one between these city-states that developed the democracy in ancient Greece, and created a new type of debate and also a new type of potential participation into the political fact. This is interesting because it's not a case that it was in this city state between the others that was born this important philosopher as Plato. In this sense, Plato, criticizing his political point of view that wanted, on the one hand, the democracy as a potential fact, however, often the aristocracy had the political power, had the monopoly of the political power, or control the political power in relation with the fact that it was the aristocracy that could permit the good instruction for their children. According to Plato, this type of city-state, it was formally in a real sense in relation with a specific type of potential participation. However, indirectly, this type of system couldn't permit truly to the other classes, in particular, to create a specific type of modality of participation in relation with attitudes and inclination. On the other hand, Plato supported this indirectly, probably considering what happened during the Peloponnesian War. In fact, in this type of war, were important some aristocrats, in particular Pericles on the one hand at the first time, but also Alcibiades in the second time, that control indirectly the city, and on the other hand, convinced the population of Athens to apply and to create a specific type of behaviors in relation with the enemy of Athens that in that period was Sparta during the Peloponnesian War. The main critique of Plato, it was in fact against, on the one hand, the aristocracy, on the other hand, the monopolization of the aristocracy, of the rhetoric, and of the dialectic. This is really important because Plato wanted to think a system where people could be debated in relation with, however, their inclinations, their attitudes, their skills, and their competences. This is another interesting topic that Plato in particular debated into the Republic. In fact, in the Republic, on the one hand, there is a relationship between soul. In fact, according to Plato, each individual has his type or specific type of soul. Therefore, each individual has his type of inclination. Therefore, if individual has his type of inclination, there is more attitudes than others that individual has. In this sense, according to Plato, each individual has his type of attitudes, each individual has his type of inclinations, each individual could develop his specific type of skills. Another topic that already Plato debated into the ancient Greek society. In modern words, we can speak about the inactualism, the inactuality of the liberalism. In this sense, Plato considered that the society is not perfect. Each individual is different between the others in relation with his skills, his inclinations, his attitudes. We are not we have not the same intelligence. We are not intelligent in the same time, and we have a lot of differences between ourselves. In this sense, according to Plato, there is therefore a relationship between the soul and the inclination in relation with potential skills. In other words, each individual, according to Plato, could develop a specific type of skills much more than other individuals. This is really interesting. And in fact, Plato wanted to, on the one hand, create a open debate in relation with an open society. But on the other hand, Plato wanted to create this correlation with this type of open society with a realistic point of view. In other words, this type of realistic point of view explains that we are different, we have different intelligence, we have different potential skills, we have different potential attitudes in relation with, therefore, a potential type of works that we have to do, and therefore each individual is potentially different from the other, but also actually different from the other. In this sense, according to Plato, the open society could exist in relation with the inactuality of liberalism. In this sense, Plato explained really well already in the ancient Greek society that the debate could exist, but only in relation with competences. Therefore, if one individual has a specific type of competence that the other individual cannot, or better, doesn't have, or also cannot have, it's important to consider these differences, but also it's also important to consider who has that specific type of competence that the other doesn't have. And on the other words, Plato tried to improve the possibility of much more people that have a specific type of attitudes to develop their attitudes. In fact, Plato thought about that people that cannot couldn't develop some skills not because they didn't have their attitudes in relation with that potential skills, but in relation with their family, their class. In this sense, Plato wanted to create a connection between classes, between soul, using the soul. In this sense, the soul, according to Plato, created a connection between class and potential skills. On the one hand, because the soul, according to Plato, and that part that in your is much more evident, created potentially your type of skills of the future and your competences where you are better than others. But on the other hand, it's really important to consider that properly. if you have that type of soul, it's important that the public organization, it's important that the city states, in other words, it's important that the social system, each single individual in relation with the social system, can improve these skills, these potential skills into the city state. This is really important, and according to this type of consideration, we have to criticize Karl Popper. In fact, Karl Popper didn't understand Plato. In fact, he explained that Plato, it was in relation with historicism, it was in relation with closed society, but he didn't understand what Plato wanted to explain in relation with attitudes, competences, skills, potential skills, and actuality of liberalism. In this sense, we understand that Plato, already in the ancient type of world, he understood that we have different type of skills, and these skills, these differences, are naturally in relation with the fact that we are different as individuals, as attitudes, as inclinations, as potential competences, or in fact as actual competences. There are some people who have some type of competences with a hierarchy. In fact, there are some people with specific type of competences, but in this hierarchy, some people are better competences, other people are less competences, and on the other hand, we have another type of consideration that we have to do in relation with the open society, in relation with the potential competences, and soul in relation with the potential skill that you have to develop. In fact, according to Plato, each individual have to consider his potential skills to develop the wealth of a city state for the others. This is another point of view, another topic that is really, really interesting, according to the fact that already Plato anticipated the welfare state. In relation with the fact that Plato explained that are the workers that have to work and in a sort of way pay the philosophers that, according to Plato, cannot have private property. In relation with, they cannot have, in this ideology of Plato, private property in relation with their type of individual. Therefore, they can have private property, but only in common. This is interesting because if philosophers work and if warriors also work, they work, but they are paid for the workers. And the work of the workers create a wealth for maintained the work or things that are important, that are necessary for the work of the warriors and of the philosophers. And the philosophers, in exchange, using this work to develop a service for the workers, their skills in relation with their brave, their courage, and their skills to defend the city state in relation with their weapons. They understand with the organization of the each soldier how to use these weapons, how to defend the city states. Workers pay the warriors to permit the defense of the city states. Workers paid the philosophers to permit the regulation, the rules of the city state. But at the same time, these rules are, according to Plato, and founded the rule of law of the city state. On the contrary of the city state, of the classical Greek city state, of the ancient history Greece, of the ancient Greek history. In fact, according to Plato, philosophers, warriors, and workers must respect and follow the rule of the city state. Each individual have to do this. And according to Plato, it's really important to create a reciprocity, to maintain the possibility of this regulation. In ancient Greek society, obviously, there were the conflict between classes. Therefore, the main classes, for example, the aristocracy could do something that the other classes cannot do. And at the same time, the ancient Greek society, the modality of thought of the ancient Greek society, it was in relation with the monopoly of the power. And at the same time, what some people, because they were aristocracy, could do and what other people could not do. What some people could control and what other people could not control. According to Plato, instead, the rule of law is in relation with the social fact and is in relation with the same rule, the same law between individuals that founded the city state. This is really interesting because, according with this type of argument, Plato, on the one hand, is not what Popper would like to explain, and on the other hand, is that specific type of philosopher who, already in ancient Greek society, wanted to limit the conflict and creating the rule of law, anticipating the idea, the classical idea of rule of law that in the ancient Greek society didn't exist. And on the other hand, Plato anticipated the idea of welfare state in relation with the potential skills that each individual could have and can impact into the city state for the next generation, for his generation, for the wealth of the city state. And this is interesting because Plato, if we read Plato in this sense, we have to admit that Plato is not an historicist author. It's not Hegel. It's not Marx. It's not a philosopher who wanted to consider each individual in a social class, but he wanted to consider each individual as he was, as it is, as he is, as she is. Also, the women in Plato, the women have rights. The women could participate at the festival territory, could be philosophers, could be workers, could be produce wealth, could be use that wealth for each other, for the hope of a city state, for the wealth of a city state, for the right of a city state. And this is really interesting. Yeah, there is also the other argument that explains that Plato is an ideal type of philosopher. Exactly, it's an ideal because in that period, in that historical period, obviously in an ancient Greek society, Plato it was an idealistic philosopher. In a world where didn't exist the rule of law, in a world where there were a lot of differences between classes, in a world where there were slaves, and also Plato in the Republic considered the possibility that some people were slaves. In this sense, Plato is in relation with his type of society and his type of historical period, obviously. But at the same time, Plato wanted to explain that these differences between them are an impact of a social fact. And this impact is systematic in relation with each individual. In fact, it's important that each individual could have and could develop his type of attitudes because wealth exists. And this is really important because there is then a connection between metaphysics and physics in relation with soul. And this is, I think, what Plato created in relation with if each individual has a specific type of attitudes and skills, therefore each individual has the type of skills in relation with his soul. But the soul is a metaphysics consideration of Plato. And this metaphysics consideration happens in the world. And we have attitudes in relation with the fact that we are into the world. But this world, when we are, is in relation with the metaphysics because we have a soul. But each soul is different and each individual have a different soul in relation with his hierarchy. The individual A could have much more the golden soul than the individual B. The individual B could have much more the iron soul than the individual C. There is a hierarchy between each part of the soul, each part of the soul, but also there is a hierarchy between the different part of the souls, the different parts of the soul. And I think that in this sense, we can consider Plato as that authors that wanted to explain the attitudes in relation with metaphysics, but attitudes exist. And I think that on the other hands, we can consider Plato the that authors that in relation with his time anticipated the genetic point of view. Therefore, Plato didn't know the genetic. But if you consider and reread Plato in other words, with other arguments, what is this soul and differences between soul if not the differences of attitudes and potentially skills that each individual could develop? If not, is a genetic, is a specific type of genetic point of view. That, according to Plato, it was a part of a metaphysical way. And it was a part of our choices that we can do, or better, we decide to do into our life. That, according to Plato, create then a different type of life with reincarnation. In the ideology of Plato, the genetic point of view, it's the metaphysics point of view relation with the decisions that we make into our life to that will produce the reincarnation, another life with another body, where the soul is into the body, according to Plato. And there is therefore an important critics against Homer, because the soul in Plato is immortal and he can reincarnate itself, according to Homer. Instead, the soul went in the end of our life into the world of Hades, into the underworld, and in that world it stays in a world of sufferance and tragedy. Bye.